So this video is meant to go against the reasons why you shouldn't read the Bible, and in return I'm going to give you 3 reasons as to why you should read the Bible, and they're going to be based off the same 3 reasons that I'm going to cover as to why people would object reading the Bible. And the first one is that the Bible is too long. It's too big of a book. And I'll be honest with you, it is too big of a book. But if you think the Bible itself, just its 1,000 or so pages, if you think that a 1,000 page book is a big book, it's actually way bigger than this. And the reason is that a lot of the stories are very condensed down, and so each line has so much meaning in it versus, just one big story that takes place over like multiple chapters. There's like just paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs about one little bitty story. It's like there's one paragraph about like a super important story. The story of the Tower of Babel, the call to Abraham, Adam and Eve. All these stories are like super short, but you could sit there and if you knew a lot about the stories, you could have hours long of discussions, and you can find this online. People just talking about maybe even little sections of those stories, which are already so small and condensed. So the Bible is actually way bigger than you would think it is. And this is actually a good thing. It's actually a good thing that the Bible is this big because the Bible records history, yes, but it records the history of mankind, and all the stories are there for a purpose. We can learn from each individual story. The story of Jonah, it's mostly recognized because Jonah was in the well for 3 days, like Christ was dead for 3 days, and that's all people really get out of it. But what happens to Jonah is that God calls him and he doesn't listen to God. And he goes down, he's like on a hill, he goes down to a dock, he goes down into the boat, then he gets cast down into the water, and then he goes down into the well. And so he's basically just gone all the way down to hell because he didn't listen to God. So those little bitty stories that are just books that are like 3 chapters long, there's so much in those stories. And that is why you should read the Bible. Even though the Bible is a huge book, that just means that there's that much more knowledge within the book. And instead of using the excuse that the Bible is too big as a reason not to read the Bible, it's actually a reason to read the Bible. The second one is the Old Testament doesn't apply to modern day Christians. And that actually is partially true. Christians are no longer under the Mosaic law necessarily, although it is still a good idea to follow some of the laws, even if they are not so-called required. Of course, in the Mosaic law, people would be stoned to death if they committed a sin like adultery or stealing. Today, we do not assert the death penalty on any of these sins, although maybe there's just a justification for like terrible, awful sins where people in America will get the death penalty. I don't really know where I'm at on the death penalty. I think I'm more on the side of saying no, that we shouldn't. I think that if the death penalty isn't required to stop the person from doing whatever it is they're doing wrong, then it should not be enforced. But if it is the only alternative, then we can take one human life and, protect like 10 other humans' lives. Like, obviously that makes sense. But of course, we don't follow very specific laws. I think there's about 618 laws in the Old Testament, and we basically follow like maybe a tenth of those, not many. But we have been set free of the law, and so this is true. However, it's not fully true because, like I said in the other part, that the stories in the Old Testament, they still apply to us, and that those people were human beings just like us. So we haven't changed that much in the past 3,000 years. Although there's still an argument as to how old the Bible says we are and whether we've adapted and whether there's been any evolution at all. But I'm not getting into that in this video. What I want to focus on is the fact that those people were still just like us, and that they made mistakes just like we make. And so we should read those stories, understand those stories, and then learn from the mistakes of others instead of doing the thing ourselves, making the mistake, and then having to learn. And then the third one is, what do I have to gain from this like 2,000-year-old book, right? The Bible is a super old book, and so of course it just doesn't apply at all to modern day life. And these are all kind of similar, and really what you can get out of this video, the reason why you should read the Bible, is because it most definitely applies to us today. There is so much knowledge within the Bible, and of course I'm Christian, and so maybe I have a bias, but if there was only one book that I had for the rest of my life, it would be the Bible. And I think that anybody who truly understands the Bible and what it's all about, even if they're an atheist, would probably say the same, or they would at least put the book up there in like the top 10 at least, because it is a great book. It has a bunch of knowledge and wisdom. Of course, there's Psalms and Proverbs and things like that, but there's also just other stories, like the story of Abraham, where he is called out of the land of his kindred, out of the land of his father. So he's there, he's nice and comfortable, his father's wealthy, he's got everything that he needs, but he goes and he follows God, and he ends up going on these adventures and doing these crazy things like protecting his brother from war. God calls him to sacrifice his son. There's famines, there's plagues, he has to go to Egypt to get food. All this crazy stuff happens, and God is with him the whole time. So even just that story alone is a really good story to study. And of course, the story of the Israelites is an amazing story. There's so much in there that people miss and that they don't talk about. And so while the Bible might be a big book, while the Old Testament law doesn't apply to us, and while it's an old book, it is still one of, if not the best books. And that is why I recommend that you read the Bible at least a few times in your life.